are the kinds of boats which entered the territorial sea of the military. I could not tell you about the issue since I was not stationed on the islands themselves. I was asked to give training at Ochetil port, so it was beyond my responsibility to be stationed on those islands.
Let me see if I can assist you a bit in your memory and also in the interest of time. Let me turn to your statement to DC Chem E3/9113 to two different pages. First page in English, ERN 0097206 and Khmer 00926-384, no French. In this particular page of your statement, you said, you were talking about the Vietnamese soldiers first. We arrested and interrogated them. We released the refugees. If they did not answer our questions and tried to hide their identity, we would send them to our security office. And a bit further, on English page ERN 0097422, Khmer 00926399. You're talking about the Vietnamese refugees or the Vietnamese fishermen. And then you say the following: we were instructed not to arrest the civilians. We could arrest them for detailed investigation to check whether they were really refugees or not. If they wanted to leave safely, we could let them go, and we were sometimes willing to send food supplies to them. Does that somehow refresh your memory, Mr. Witness?
Answer: on this particular issue, I have told Long Dani when I was interviewed in the rice field. Although this was the case, I want to clarify for the court that I gave statements to Long Dani during which there was a audio recording.
But are you confirming now in court what I just read out to you? Is that what you said, and is that indeed correct?
Answer: yes, that is correct.
Let me elaborate a bit further on this very topic and read to you something another company commander of Division 164 said. His name is Hing Red. He was the acting chairman of Company 4, Battalion 450. In his WRI, Mr. President, that is E319/23.3.12, question and answer 75. He said the following. He's talking about boats, Vietnamese boats with refugees, and he said, and I quote, Son Sen said if those Vietnamese were refugees to Thailand, we should not arrest them and we should let them travel on. End of quote. Do you remember an instruction from Son Sen to Division 164 that Vietnamese refugees were not to be arrested and that they should be allowed to travel on?
Answer: it was the instructions issued to the division, then those instructions were from the upper echelon. I was tasked with training, giving technical trainings. I received no orders or instruction of this particular issue and how to deal with this issue. In fact, I was there and I received the training, not provided training. That training was assisted technically by China.
I understand, but was it indeed Son Sen's explicit instruction that once it was clear that the Vietnamese people in those boats were not military but refugees or fishermen, they would be allowed to move on to where they were going?
President, please hold on. Witness, you have the floor now. International Deputy Co-Prosecutor.
I have cross-checked, Mr. President, document E3319.1.3.12. It is the record of an interview, and we disclosed it to the parties in June 2015. As a matter of fact, I don't believe the defense is asking that this document be placed before the chamber as an evidentiary material, unless the defense says the contrary. We haven't done so. I don't believe this document has already been admitted into evidence as an evidentiary material. So may I request the defense counsel to clarify the matter, perhaps.
Monsieur le Président, je me permets.
Mr. President, may I take the floor? Because if I remember correctly, I think it is one of the documents we requested to have tendered into evidence at the end of the year, and it appears that the chamber did allow that document to be admitted to evidence, and no party objected to it. It was the defense of the Kyo Sampan team, or rather it was Kyo Sampan's team that requested that that document be tendered into evidence, and it was done so.
Peut-être pour assister la Chambre.
This might be of some assistance to the chamber. I have found the number of the application. At least it was the 5th of January 2016, and the record of interview, or the transcript, was E1370, and it was at 9:12. That was when the decision was rendered. E3 was 61/370.1. That's the number of the document, the transcript.
President, so it is now clear for everyone and it can be used as the basis for the examination. Copper, you may resume your questioning.
Thank you, Mr. President. Again, I will repeat my question, Mr. Witness. Do you know whether there was an instruction from Son Sen to Division 164 instructing the cadres not to touch refugees, Vietnamese refugees, when they would be crossing the territorial sea. In other words, not to arrest them and to let them travel on.
Answer. Based on this witness, it is true. I was a caterer in charge of ships. However, I was not responsible for the arrangement of the traveling of foreigners crossing the territorial sea of Cambodia. I was a part of the training. Regarding the instructions and orders, they were under the command and responsibility of those who were stationed on respective islands. That may have been the case. For me, I never received instruction and orders, as you said.
Thank you, Mr. Witness. Is it correct that once it had been established that the people on board were Vietnamese soldiers, that they then would be arrested?
Answer. Based on my documents or my statements that I have provided. On one particular occasion, on that day, which I cannot tell you the exact dates and month and year, on that day, while I was receiving training and I was on the journey to the new and old island and also Koh Tang or Tang Island, I encountered and met one Klung ethnicity person and one Vietnamese on Tang Island. At that time, I did not ask them who they were. What I asked was the question to the soldiers stationed on Tang Island, and I asked those soldiers where they were from, and I was told that they were Vietnamese, said the witness, and I was told that they were traveling, crossing the southeastern part of the territorial sea water, and they were arrested last night or the night before. As I said, my responsibility was to be engaged in the training, and on that day I learned in summary about the capture of the two people. So I never poke into the business under their responsibility.
I understand. Let me move on to something that is very closely related to this. In your WRI, you were asked questions about internal and external enemies of Democratic Kampuchea. I will get back to that shortly, but let me read to you another excerpt from the same Commander Heng Reed's statement, or WRI. That's the same document as before, Mr. President, E319/23.3.12. In question and answer 70, he says the following. The question: you said there were two kinds of enemies, internal and the external. Do you think the Vietnamese fishermen were regarded as the external enemy and were taken to be killed? Answer: I do not think so. The external enemy referred to the Vietnamese soldiers along the border. Regarding the seizures of the Vietnamese boats to my knowledge, the Vietnamese fishermen were not regarded as the external enemy, but they had violated the territorial waters of democratic Kampuchea. Mr. Witness, is that correct, what Hingrit is saying, that fishermen and most likely refugees were not regarded as the external enemy, but that was only something applicable to Vietnamese military?
Answer. Regarding Hingrit's testimonies or statements, these statements were true. The conflict of borders between Vietnam and Cambodia between 1975 and 1977 was the hot matter. And during the time, the Vietnamese refugees were traveling, passing Cambodian territorial seawater. They were not considered the enemies of the democratic Cambodia. Two targeted groups of people were considered enemies of democratic Cambodia. One was the Vietnamese troops who was trying to attack and capture the territory sea of Cambodia, including the island. And as for the internal enemies, they were those who instilled the contradiction within Cambodia, and they were those who tried to initiate issue within Cambodia.
Thank you, Mr. Witness. I will get back to the internal enemies shortly. Let me just read to you one very small excerpt of another witness, and that is about the chronology, the years. Mr. President, that is the testimony of a Division 1 West Zone Deputy Commander. He might be coming to testify, that's why I don't mention his name. It's E319/23.3.21. In the question and answer 24, Mr. Witness, this Division 1, the West Zone Commander says, and I quote, from 1975 to 76, these instructions were the general instructions. And now it comes, they instructed us not to seek trouble with Vietnam because our country was small and Vietnam was a large country. End of quote. Is it correct what this witness is saying, that the instruction was not to seek any trouble with Vietnam in the years 1975 and 1976?
Answer. Based on this witness, it is his own statement. I do not know how to react. I agree that usually a small country had no ambition or had no power to attack and capture the bigger country. It is my understanding and my own idea that I agree with what he said.
Thank you, Mr. Witness. One small question in relation to the Vietnamese military or soldiers who violated the territorial borders and were arrested. You said in your WRI and your DC camp statement that they were sent to Phnom Penh to be interrogated. Is that correct?
And if there is what I have stated in my previous statement, then that is correct. Whatever I stated in my interview is based on the fact of our communication via radio. It could be a shortwave radio, and another communication is the line, a telephone line, in order to receive the information. However, I personally did not witness the transactions of how those people were sent.
But did you know at the time it was S21, or is S21 something that you heard about after 79?
On the issue of S21, I simply knew that its purpose was to educate those whose living condition was not in line with the standard. Or you could say those who did not follow the situations. And that's what I knew, that the office was established to re-educate cadres or to resolve other matters within the concerned units.
I have some more questions on this, but I will move on. Mr. Witness, in your testimony before the investigators, as I just mentioned, you referred to two enemies, the external enemy and the internal enemy. Is it correct that you said that the first enemy of Democratic Cambodia was Vietnam, and that the second enemy was the internal enemy?
That is my statement.
In that same answer, that is answer 75 of your WRI, you refer to study sessions or education sessions organized by the General Staff in Phnom Penh, chaired by Son Sen. What do you remember about those education sessions chaired by Son Sen, and what exactly was said by him in relation to the external enemy Vietnam and the internal enemies?
To my recollection, the policy is that time was about the current situation of the sovereignty of Cambodia, in particular the situations along the border. And that there was no independence or peace along the border due to the sporadic disruptions of fighting along the Khmer-Cambodia, the Khmer and Vietnam border. For that reason, the policy at the time was that those enemies of Cambodia were in two categories. One was Vietnam, and the second category was the internal enemy.
Let me ask you a very concrete question. The second in command of Division 164, Dim, Commander Dim, was he an internal enemy?
From what I knew about them, I personally cannot say whether he was considered an internal enemy. After the division was organized, his role was also in the leadership of that division. I knew him in late 75 for the full year of 76, and he disappeared in 1977. For that reason, I am not in a position to confirm whether he was alleged as an internal enemy, but I stated in my previous interview that he disappeared and I did not see him since.
Thank you, Mr. Withers. Let me see if I can jog your memory with some more concrete evidence as to what the internal and external enemies were. I would like to read again to you an excerpt from the same company commander of Division 164, Hing Red, question and answer 49, and I would like to ask your reaction to what he stated to the investigators. Question: according to the revolutionary flags and revolutionary youths, the two main intentions of democratic Kampuchea were to fight internal enemies and to fight external enemies. Can you clarify these points? And then he says the following, and I quote: internal enemies refer to those embedded inside the ranks of the party. They talked about the history of the Communist Party of Kampuchea, the establishment of the Khmer Workers' Party, led by Sun Ngoc Min, and the hundreds of Cambodian children sent to study in Vietnam and sent back. Internal enemies also meant that we had to struggle ideologically to build the proletarian class and smash the rich class based on the poor class. External enemies refer to the Vietnamese. The Vietnamese strategy since the Ho Chi Minh time aimed to create an Indochina Federation, incorporating three countries, Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, under the control of Vietnam. End of quote. Mr. Witness, is this something that you heard as well, maybe from Son Sen during one of those education sessions, or maybe you read it in the revolutionary flags, or maybe you heard it in a different manner? Is this something that sounds familiar to you?
From the statement or the account by Ingrid, which is of course his personal account of what happened, the policy at the time was that the Communist Party of Cambodia was to build the stance of each cadre to be part of the proletarian class, with the ultimate aim to build a country to install the poor peasants class in the leading position of the country. So his account is in line with the policy and the line at the time.
So what he said is something that you heard as well. You remember hearing things about the Khmer Workers' Party or the Khmer Labour Party and about the Indochinese Federation. Is that correct?
That is correct. Because after the 1954 Geneva Convention, Ho Chi Minh had an idea of encompassing the three countries Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos into one Indo-China Federation led by Ho Chi Minh himself. So that statement is correct.
Thank you, Mr. Witness. Let me move on to something another division colleague told investigators of DC Camp. His name is Nam Lam. I refer, Mr. President, to document E319/23.3.17.1. It's translated in all three in two languages. ERN 011708333 English, French 00996698, Khmer 00955619. Can I?
President, witness, please hold on. And the international lead co-lawyer for civil parties, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. A short observation. We haven't found this document in the list of documents that were admitted by the Chamber and that fall under the 87.4 rule. That's document E319/23.1.17.1, as all documents related to this witness have not been proposed or accepted by or admitted by the Chamber. So I'd simply like you to verify the status of this document, because as far as we're concerned, we cannot use this document unless the defense requests it in a clear way and that all parties may react to this request.
I'm not sure why it's a concern of the civil parties, but it might be possible, Mr. President, that because of the changed deadline, we missed this document to put it on the interface. That is possible. I just received a message. So by this, the request to nevertheless read one or two excerpts from that DC Camp statement.
Did you go through the 87.4 procedures? That was the issue. Not. Is it admitted or requested?
Si je peux me permettre.
If I may say, the document is on the interface as far as we have understood. However, it has not been included in an 87.4 request. So that is what we're asking the Chamber to check today.
Can I make an oral request right now to the Chamber to have it admitted?
Can I just clarify something else? Have you, before your oral request now, before that, already made a request? We want to avoid double decisions.
No, we haven't.
President, what about the other parties, namely the co-prosecutors? Do you want to react to the oral request by Defense Counsel, that is E319/23.3.17.1, in order to use it as his best for questioning this witness? You may proceed, co-prosecutor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, we believe that there are rules that we have to respect, and we have to respect the principles of adversarial hearings before this Chamber. If every party comes to the hearing without having done their job, that is to say, going through the procedures such as they exist and sustaining their arguments in view of Rule 87.4, if the parties come and propose documents just right off the bat before this chamber, everything is going to turn to chaos. So I think that a minimum amount of respect to other parties and to the chamber is necessary, because you have not yet taken this decision and apparently you cannot take it now. So I think it's a bit too late. They should have proceeded as required, and this is what we're trying to do. We are also endeavoring each time to check that all the documents that we want to use are documents that we have submitted ahead of time to the chamber and that have been ruled upon. So I think all parties should do the same.
Mr. President.
President, and the chamber now would like to give the floor to the lead co-lawyers for civil parties.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think that in principle, we have never formally objected to the use of a document by the defense teams. We understand perfectly everyone's working tempo. Everyone respects the rules, including the Queue Sans Pont defense. All that was necessary was an email. All that was necessary was asking us before, instead of using documents that are not that do not fall under 87.4 requests. It's a question of method only, because it takes an enormous amount of time for the parties to check these lists. So simply, there should be a minimum amount of courtesy. That's how I should call it, and simply ask for the authorization beforehand. Otherwise, what's the point of the interface? What's the point of an adversarial debate if everyone can use documents without everyone being aware of this? However, we will rely on the Chamber's wisdom in that regard.
And what about the defense team for Queue Sans Pont? Do you wish to make any observation regarding the request by Counsel Copper for that document?
I have no specific comments to make, Mr. President, given that my colleague wishes to use a document that he considers to be exculpatory, and on that basis, I won't make any specific comments. I'd like to remind you that it is sometimes an issue when we don't have the time to anticipate enough and prepare for our examinations, and that things are left aside. I heard the observations of the co-prosecutor. If I'm not mistaken, we have experienced such problems several times before this chamber. Documents that had not followed under an 87.4 request, and this has happened on the other side of the bar. Simply like to remind you that we are very sensitive to these requests, so we do not object that this document be used because it's in the context of a cross-examination based on exculpatory evidence.
Judge Laverne, do you have the floor?
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. A simple request for clarification for the Nguyen Chia defense. I note that the document in question is an interview conducted by DCCAM, and are there other documents related to the same person? Was the same person interviewed by the OCIJ, for example?
Yes, I believe 2 times. Respectively, documents E319-23 3.17 and E319/23.3.18.
And were these WRIs also the subject of an 87.4 request? Have they been tendered for that?
No, Judge Laverne, the answer is no. The thing is, it's all very last moment. We're dealing with a whole new segment which wasn't investigated in the closing order at all, or in the investigation. So we were late, agreed but it is really not any attempt of bad faith. We just discovered it after 12 o'clock deadline. And we will file, of course, a Rule 87 request. But for now, because of its obvious relevance, we would like to use it with this particular witness.
Interface, which is a good thing because people were at least on notice, but you didn't check if if it had gone through an 87. Is this basically it? Is this the situation?
That's the situation.
Yeah.
President, the chamber rejects the request by the Defense Counsel Corporal in relation to document E319/23.3.17.1 at this juncture of time, as the Council fails to comply with Rule 87 for procedures. And the Chamber would like to remind all the parties that all parties must follow Rule 87.4 procedures, and you need to make such submissions before you use them to question witnesses. And from what we just have a look at this document runs into several pages. And of course, for that reason, Counsel Corporal is advised to not use this document and refer to other documents when questioning this witness.
I fail to understand your ruling, Mr. President. Nevertheless,
Can I just add something very short? I know you need the time, but one decisive factor in the ruling was also that we basically have to deal with all related documents at the same time, and that runs to, from what I hear, 60 pages, which makes it difficult to decide on the spur of the moment.
Having said that, Mr. President, I would like to request that the defense has some additional time to question this witness. We're almost 11:30, Technically, we have used 2 sessions, but we need to have some more time with this witness.
And how much time do you anticipate? And you need also to consult with the defense team for Kiel Sampon for your combined time, so that we will be able to rule on your request.
Well, as far as we're concerned, I can say that a priori we will need a half an hour to cross-examine the witness, given the fact that a certain number of topics that we were considering were already covered by my colleague from the Nunchiat team. And if these issues were going to be discussed later on, I don't know how many extra minutes my colleague needs for that, but it's obvious that if the issues he intends to discuss in the minutes given to him will reduce the time that we need. But as of now, a priori speaking, we need a half an hour.
May I, in the light of these submissions, request that the defense is granted one full session, one additional full session.
Deputy Co-Prosecutor, you have the floor.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. In principle, we do not object to the extension of the time given to the defense. Given the rich nature of this witness's testimony, this said, would request that we be allowed the same extension, because we also have a lot of subjects to cover and would like to revisit those issues more specifically with this defense. Yesterday, the defense was a lot more expeditious in examining the witness on the capture of Phnom Penh, but we do not object for the time being, but would request that the defense or the prosecution be given the same extension of time as the defense may be given.
President, the bench decides to grant one session for each side of the bar. That is one session for the defense teams. That is for the first session this afternoon. And for the co-prosecutors and the lead co-lawyers, an additional session is also granted. However, it is now appropriate for our lunch break. We take a break now and resumed at 1:30 this afternoon to continue our proceedings. Court officer, please assist the witness at the waiting room reserved for witnesses and civil parties during the lunch break and invite him as well as the duty counsel back into the courtroom at 1:30. Security personnel, you are instructed to take Kyo Sampon to the waiting room downstairs and have him returned to attend the proceedings this afternoon before 1:30. The court is now in recess.
សូមអញ្ជើញក្រោកឈរ